Some of the loneliest moments in life happen when we are surrounded by people. You ever felt that way? All around you, there are people everywhere, but you wonder if any of them really knows you. I mean, you have friends, family, people who know your name. You can walk into a crowded room and smile and talk and even laugh with people, but still wonder, does anybody here really know me? Would anybody notice if I weren't here? Is there somewhere that I truly belong? Now, those aren't small questions. In fact, they touch on one of our deepest human needs, because we don't just want people around us. We want to know that we matter to someone. And maybe that's why nearly 50 years later, one of Queen's biggest hit songs still speaks to us. Because beyond the incredible vocals, the piano, the layered harmonies, Freddie Mercury somehow sounding both powerful and heartbroken at the same time, he asks a painfully simple question: can anybody find me somebody to love? And if we're honest, that's more than just a lyric. It's an ache almost every single one of us understands. The ache to be seen, to be known, to be loved, to know that somewhere with someone we truly belong. And here's the question I want us to wrestle with today. What if our desire to belong isn't a weakness that we need to overcome, but part of the way that God created us? One of the weirdest things about modern life is that we are more connected than ever, while also being more lonely than ever. We have things like social media and group chats. We have followers and notifications and endless digital connections if we want them. And yet studies keep showing that people feel more and more isolated. And honestly, I think part of the reason for that is that we've gotten very good at being visible without actually being known. You can see someone's vacation photos, favorite coffee order, political opinions, which I wish people would just keep those to themselves. We can even know what they have for every meal of every day and still not know their heart, still not know their pain, still not know what keeps them awake at night. And underneath all the noise, many are quietly carrying the same ache. Does anybody really know me? And if they did, if they really knew me, would they still want me around? That's the ache underneath this song. But in no way is this a new problem. Loneliness and our need to belong is as old as humanity itself, all the way back in Genesis 2. God looks at Adam and says something remarkable. And what makes this significant is that for the first time in the entire creation story, God says that something isn't good. Now, up to this point, throughout the creation story, we see God as the artist and as the architect creating. And each segment of creation, he looks at what he has made and says, it is good. Light, good. Land and sea, good. Plants and animals, good. Then we're told in Genesis 2 that God forms Adam from the dust of the ground. He kind of makes this uh, lump of clay into the form of a human being, breathes his life-giving spirit into him, looks at this human being who is living in paradise, and for the first time, God says, it is not good. But what wasn't good? God said, it is not good for man to be alone. And here's what makes that so remarkable. At this point in the creation story, in the creation narrative, nothing is broken. Sin hasn't entered the story. This isn't a consequence of the fall. Human beings simply weren't meant to live life alone. Think about that. Our need for connection isn't a weakness. It's part of the way we were created. We were made to know and be known, to love and be loved. From the very beginning, God says, it is not good for people to be alone. And that's not just an observation about marriage, like we often connect it. It's about humanity. We were made for relationship. We are made for friendships and community and belonging, and not just on some shallow interactive level. We were meant to have real connections. And honestly, Queen captures this perfectly. This longing is perfectly captured in their song when they say, can anybody find me somebody to love? Not somebody to impress, not somebody to perform for, not somebody to scroll past, somebody to love. That's not just a human preference. It's part of God's design. Long before loneliness became one of our defining struggles, God had already created us with this need for connection. Which brings us to the first truth I want us to look at today, that we were created for community. One of the biggest lies in our American culture is the idea that strength equals independence. That maturity means I don't need anybody. But Scripture paints a completely different picture. Take, for example, the early church. In Acts chapter 2, we are shown that they shared life together. Meals, prayers, resources, struggles, joy and pain. They weren't just attending church services when it was convenient. They were in the process of becoming a family. Their lives were being connected in ways that went far beyond an hour and a half together once a week. They knew who was struggling. They knew who needed help. They knew who needed encouragement. They shared meals together. They opened their homes to one another, carried each other's burdens, and celebrated one another's joys. They weren't simply worshiping in the same room. They were learning how to belong to one another. And honestly, that kind of community is rare, because real community requires vulnerability, patience, forgiveness, and presence. But those things are hard, because that kind of community asks something of us. It asks us to make room for people who don't always think like us, act like us, or get it right, which means that it can get real messy. But here's the most frustrating part about community. It requires other people. People can be difficult. They disappoint us, misunderstand us, get on our nerves, sometimes our last nerve, and sometimes they hurt us. So when relationships become difficult, our natural instinct is often to pull away. But the problem is, the very people we sometimes want to pull away from are often the people that we need the most. It's kind of like a campfire. Have you ever noticed what happens when you pull one log away from the bonfire or the campfire? For a while, that log will still glow. It will still give off some warmth. Not as much warmth if it was with the rest of the fire, but some warmth. It still burns for a little while, but eventually that lonely log will begin to grow cold. Not because there's anything wrong with the log, but because a single ember was never meant to sustain fire. And neither are we. We were never meant to carry our burdens alone, face our struggles on our own, or go through the highs and the lows of life without people beside us. We were not designed for isolation, which is why some people are so spiritually exhausted. Not because they've stopped believing in God, but because they're trying to follow Him all alone, which is where our problem begins. Even though we were created for community, many of us are still trying to do life and faith all on our own. But that's not the model that Jesus gave us. He didn't enter our existence to create isolated followers. Jesus, this is truth too, Jesus created a family. And this is one of the most beautiful things about Christianity. Jesus doesn't merely save a bunch of individuals. He creates a people, a family, a community rooted not in politics, not in race or income brackets, personality or background, but instead Jesus created a community that was rooted in grace. And that's not just something that Jesus taught, it's something that He modeled. For example, when Jesus began His ministry, think about the people that He brought together. He didn't gather people who naturally belonged together. He brought together fishermen, artisans, tradesmen, farmers, zealots, tax collectors, people who under normal circumstances would never sit at the same table, much less share 3 years of their lives following a rabbi. For example, let's think about the most obvious two. A zealot not only wanted freedom from Rome, but they fought for it. While a tax collector made his living working with Rome while ripping off his own people in the process. They came to the table with completely different loyalties, different assumptions, different ways of seeing the world. And they weren't the only ones. Jesus gathered people from all kinds of different backgrounds, with different stories, different personalities, different ways of looking at life. And He brought them all in close. He gave them all a place at the same table. Why? Because Jesus didn't wait for everybody to finally agree before giving them somewhere to belong. He gave them grace. And grace gives everybody a place at the table. Grace brings people together who would have never chosen one another and teaches them how to become a family. Not just followers, but a community. So the answer to loneliness was never supposed to be more information or more entertainment or more followers. The answer was always people. Real people. Real relationships. Real community. Which means that it's not about perfection, but belonging. Remember that old TV show, Cheers? Remember that theme song that would get stuck in your head all week long? That theme song was based around this idea. It says, sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name. But why did that resonate so deeply with people? Because everybody wants a place where they're recognized, welcomed. They're a place where they're missed when they're absent and accepted without pretending. That longing goes deeper than simply wanting people around us. We all want a place where we can walk through the door, knowing that there is a place for us here. And if there is anywhere people should know that they are welcomed and valued and truly belong, it should be the church. Not because everybody thinks alike, not because everybody has the same story, and certainly not because we all have it figured out, but because grace gives us all a place at the same table. That said, this kind of community doesn't just happen. We have to keep showing up for each other, because no one truly feels love from a distance, which leads us to truth 3. Real love requires presence. In John 13, Jesus says, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Notice Jesus doesn't say everyone will know that you are my disciples if you can win arguments, or if your theology is perfect, or if your church has the best Christmas program. He says they'll know us by our love for one another. Real love, visible love, embodied love. Because love isn't just something we feel, love is something that we make present. And that's exactly what Jesus did. Jesus didn't love people from a distance. Jesus showed up. He sat at tables that other people would avoid. He reached out and touched people that others wouldn't want anything to do with. He listened to people others chose to ignore, and he made room for people that others had pushed aside. Meaning, Jesus didn't simply tell people that they were loved. He made his love present. And that's what real love looks like. Showing up, listening, caring, walking with people. Not perfection, but presence. But here's where all that gets so very difficult. Real presence requires more than simply being in the same room. It requires that we allow ourselves to actually be known. And honestly, I think that's what a lot of us are truly afraid of. Because what if we are actually fully seen? We ask ourselves, if people knew everything about me, if people knew about my doubts, my struggles, my regrets, the things that I try to hide so emphatically, would they still want me? Would they still make room for me? Would they still love me? Maybe that's one of the most important questions underneath loneliness. And maybe that's what's going on underneath Freddie Mercury's cry. Can anybody find me somebody to love? Because we don't just want someone to love the version of ourselves we've carefully presented. We want to know if someone could really know us and still choose to love us, which is the beauty of the gospel. There is nothing about you or me that God has yet to discover. No hidden struggle, no secret regret, no part of your story that catches God by surprise. God already knows the whole story. But because of grace, God still says, come closer. With God, being fully known is not the end of belonging. It's where belonging begins. And maybe that's also where real community begins. Not when everyone finally gets their act together. Not when everyone finally agrees. Not when we become people who will never disappoint each other. But when we can actually be ourselves, while also making it safe for others to be themselves too. Real belonging happens when we no longer have to hide the parts of ourselves to be accepted, but when we can be fully known and still know that we are fully loved, that we are wanted, and that there is a place where we truly belong. That's the kind of church that I want to be a part of. And I hope you do too. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you have a blessed week, and we'll see you again real soon.